Hello and namaste everyone, and a warm afternoon to you all. I am Akanksha Sharma, an active youth environment advocate and currently working as a program intern in Youth for Environment Education and Development YFEED Foundation, Kathmandu, Nepal. I would like to welcome you all in today's webinar on the behalf of YFEED Foundation. We are both glad and happy to have you here today in our session. So I will be your host and moderator for today's session. And on today's session, we will be discussing on the topic of how protecting tropical forests and biodiversity can prevent coronavirus and other emerging zoonotic diseases. This webinar plans to run around for 1 hour and 30 minutes, and I would also like to inform you that YFEED is live telecasting this webinar on Facebook. So I would also like to welcome you all who have just joined this webinar via Facebook. First of all, I would like to request to please turn on your camera for a picture, and I would like to request our technical team to take the pictures. I would like to request everyone to please turn on your camera for a picture. Yes, thank you everyone. Thank you so much. So for beginning the program on an official note, I would like to request my colleague, Ms. Samika Gosai, to present her welcome remarks. Ms. Samika, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Akanksha. Namaste and hello everyone. I am Samika Gosai, a program intern at YFEED. And on behalf of all the YFEED family, I would like to express my hearty welcome to all the speakers and participants. Youth for Environment Education and Development Foundation is a non-profit organization that was officially established in 2018. YFIT works in the field of inclusive education, environment conservation, and youth empowerment, women empowerment, and indigenous rights. I would like to thank our supporting partners, Pawanka Fund, Land is Life, and Asia Youth for Indigenous People. The relationship between the environment, biodiversity, human society, and human disease is complex. While wildlife may be a source of human disease, and domesticated animals may act as amplifiers of pathogens emerging from the wild. Studies have shown that most emerging infectious diseases, whether in wildlife, domestic animals, plants, or people, are driven by human activities that result in unpredictable negative outcomes. It is important that we recognize disease emergence is not only about the relationship between domestic animals or wildlife and people, but also about the complexity of the ecosystem as a whole and the interaction between biotic and abiotic components. Thus, to help understand the importance of protecting tropical forests and biodiversity to prevent coronavirus and other zoonotic diseases and break the chain of transmission, YFIT has organized this international youth webinar on the topic Forest and Pandemics, how protecting tropical forest and biodiversity can prevent coronaviruses and other emerging zoonotic diseases, with an ultimate goal to spread awareness and conserve the environment. Hoping to look forward for an interactive session where you not only enjoy the webinar but also learn something new. Thank you. Over to you, Akanksha.
Thank you so much, Samika. So that was a short introduction about what are the things that we are going to discuss in today's session. So without further ado, I would like to move on forward in today's session. So we have 5 guest speakers with us today for the panel discussion. So I would like you all to introduce to today's presenters. First up, we have Mr. Jomel Limbago, who is a faculty member of the Fisheries and Marine Science Department of Cavite State University, CVSU, from Nai, Cavite, Philippines. Mr. Jomel Limbago is currently the Research Unit Head of Cavite State University, Nai, Cavite, Philippines. Currently, he is taking his Master of Science degree, major in zoology at the University of Philippines, Los Banos, with his research conducted in Eheim University, Matsuyama, Japan, on the gene expression of CYP450 from hepatic tissue of Nile tilapia. As a researcher at heart, he continues to deliver research agenda that would benefit the society and the environment. Next up, we have Ms. Vidhi Adhikari. She is a youth environment advocate and member at Extinction Rebellion Youth XRY, and she is from Kathmandu, Nepal. She is currently studying BBA at Apex College, and she is also the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion Youth Nepal. She is an active environmentalist who believes that climate activism is today's fundamental necessity and everyone's responsibility. She has to say that we are to decide the kind of future we want and advocate in its favor. The future of Earth depends on our choices of today. Then we have Ms. Cindy Kobe. She is a program officer at International Alliance of Indigenous and Tribal People of the Tropical Forest, IAITPTF, from Nakuru, Kenya. After that, we have Ms. Jacqueline Lipi Sakia. Ms. Jacqueline is Asia Pacific Regional Focal Point on DRR, United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, UNMGCY, from Jorhat, Assam, India. Her experience extends from research, policy making, and advocacy, emergency response and relief, recovering planning, and capacity building. She has completed her master's in disaster management from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Her keen interest is disaster risk management, nature-based adaptation and sustainable recovery, and CNY-DRR. Finally, we have Ms. Archana Soreng, who is a member of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, and she is from Sundergarh, Odisha, India. She has participated as the only indigenous youth representative from India in the 66th session of CESCR, a day of general discussion on land and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights on 14th December. She was also selected in the list of 7 indigenous grantees across the world who made oral intervention along with a written intervention in the session. She is selected as one of the 7 members of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, launched on 27th July by the UN Secretary General himself. She is the only one from India. Others are from Sudan, Fiji, Moldova, United States, France, and Brazil. Yes, so that was a short introduction of our 5 guest speakers who will be speaking here in today's webinar. Now we will shortly begin our discussions. Before that, I just have a short notice that our guest speakers have 10 minutes each to complete the presentation. And we would appreciate if you could stick with the time frame for the presentation. And for all the participants who have any queries, please feel free to drop it in the chat box, or we also have a question and answer round where you can interact with our guest speakers for your queries. And I hope they will address them accordingly. So with this, I would like to move forward in today's session, and I would like to request our first speaker to come forth for his presentation. And I just would like to hand this session over to Mr. Limbago. Mr. Limbago, if you would please.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me for this international webinar. I am Jomel Limbago. I'm a faculty of Fisheries and Marine Science Department of Cavite State University, Cavite, Philippines, and also a graduate student of zoology from University of the Philippines, Los Baños. And today I'm going to present my discussion on unraveling the truth and kicking off fictions, anthropogenic pressures exacerbating the global pandemic. And because we are discussing the pathogens here, primarily of SARS-CoV-2 or the causative agent of COVID-19, I want to discuss first what is a virus. Actually, there is complex structures of the virus, but let me discuss what are the three major components of the virus. We have the envelope proteins, which covers this the viral genome. The viral genome may either be a double-stranded DNA or a single-stranded RNA, and also an enzyme for replication. However, most of the scientists across the globe considers this virus or the virions to be non-living because they cannot replicate themselves solely, but they need host cells for them to replicate. For how these viruses infect the host is in this process. As you can see in this figure, you can see here that this virion attaches to the host cells in the plasma membrane or the cell membrane, as I must say. There is a receptor here, and it invades the cell. And if it invades the cell, it will hijack the process of transcription and translation, or the protein making. If I'm saying protein making, actually we are made of proteins. The body and organisms are made up of proteins. So the cells is actually creating proteins. It's functional proteins or either functional proteins or processed proteins. So the virions will hijack this process, and instead of creating proteins, the cell will create viruses. And if that cell creates more and more and more and more viruses inside its cytoplasm, then it will burst, and then the virions will get out of the cell, and this virion will infect nearby cells until they proliferate the organism, and that's how these viruses actually cause diseases on organisms. However, let me clear that there is a complex biological pathways behind every single viruses that is infecting our body. But what I'm discussing here is basically the basics. And let me also talk the proximal origin of the SARS-CoV-2. The SARS-CoV-2 actually has many origins and complex pathways, of course. But there are studies and recent studies published on the peer-reviewed journals that concludes that SARS-CoV-2 is actually related to the COVID viruses that is found out in bats collected in China. And this implies that bats might be the original host or vectors of this virus in animals sold at the seafood market in Wuhan, and might represent an intermediate host facilitating the emergence of the virus. They may be the original host, or they may be one of the vectors of this virus. There's interesting studies here when researchers collected nucleotide of viruses from different sampling locations in China. They found out that these viruses are related to bats viruses. So the implication that bats may be either a vector or original host of these viruses. This one also, the genome of the pangolin COVID is actually 91.02% the same to the identity of the SARS-CoV-2 isolated in humans. So the same implication that this COVID-19 is actually coming from the pangolin or bats. However, let me clear that there is no evidences that showed a direct transmission of COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 from the pangolin to humans or bats to humans. Therefore, whether pangolin species are good candidates for SARS-CoV-2 origin is still under debate. So can we blame the animals for this? Can we blame the pangolin, the bats? Of course not. We cannot blame them. It is time to exonerate or exclude the blame for pangolins and bats from the transmission of SARS-CoV-2 to humans, because the real triggers for pandemics or this pandemic are the societal organizations and society-driven human-animal contacts and amplification loops provided by modern human society. For example, the human contacts, the land conversions and the land use changes, the international markets and international trades, and the international mobility. We will discuss that on later parts. So how this SARS-CoV-2 it infects both humans and animals? The answer is because they are actually zoonotic diseases. It is actually a type of zoonotic disease where it can be transferred from animals to humans and vice versa. So what is very alarming about this is because 75% of newly emerging diseases are actually zoonosis, and that 60% of infections diseases in humans are spread from animals. And that is very alarming and triggering nowadays because COVID-19 is also a zoonotic diseases coming from animals. And of course, the pathways of transferring the virus or the pathogen from the animals to humans is also complex. But that is summarized into 4 categories. This one. As you can see here, these zoonotic diseases can be transmitted into humans by 4 categories or summarized categories. The vector-borne diseases. So vector-borne diseases is because they have a vector for transmission. So what is the vector? So it's an animal that delivers the pathogen to the humans. Example is that your dengue and malaria, where they have vectors of mosquitoes, and if they bit in the human, and then they can be infected with the virus. Another thing is that the airborne and waterborne diseases, if the air and the water has a pathogen in it, and then human can inhale it or intake the water, then it can be transmitted. The next is the direct contact to animals. This is very common to domestic and farmed animals, where if they are infected with pathogens, they can infect human as well. And the very common one is the foodborne diseases, which is very common also on meat products and poultry products. And as I've said a while ago, there is a complex pathway of pandemics. And let us take a look on the case of SARS-CoV-2. So in the case of SARS-CoV-2, as you can look at this, there is actually 4 phases of the pandemics. You have the sylvatic phase, the latency phase, the amplification phase, the epidemic phase, and the pandemic phase. Let's start with the sylvatic phase. So in the sylvatic phase, it can start on the interspecies infection. So from pangolins to bats, from bats to bats, or that's intra-specific, from pangolins to bats, from bats to mammals, or what. But that may be very ancient, and we cannot detect that. What is happening here is actually we are inducing actually inducing this anthropogenic pressures, this farm, and we're actually illegally trading this pangolins. And in that case, there is an accidental emergence from unknown source, inducing the latency phase of SARS-CoV-2 or the COVID-19 last October 2019 to November 2019 in Wuhan, Hubei. So what is very difficult on this part, it is because it is impossible to control, because there is a stochastic invisible latent infection during that time, where we don't know who, what, when, and why they're infected. That's why this phase is very impossible to control, which leads to the third phase of the pandemic, which is the amplification phase, where the infection creates a infinite amplification loop, where it amplifies into a threshold level. If that infection cases amplify into a threshold level, that phase will create the epidemic phase, where it is induced by anthropogenic pressure of land transport across China. And because of this land transport and it cross borders across China on whole provinces and whole nation, whole country of China. By that, we're actually inducing the pandemic phase, where it travels across borders of countries across the globe. So we're going to talk now, what is the best preventive measures for this? Is the post-epidemic reactions? Is the containment or the lockdowns we're doing right now? The tests that we are we are shouting to be taken, especially in our country, Philippines. The treatment, which is researchers taking right, is creating actions right now. But if we look on the root cause of the problem is here in the sylvatic phase. It is very impossible to control the sylvatic phase, but we can reduce the risk of emergence of any pandemics. But how? We can have a safety control. We can organize here. We can safety control, or we can organize wet markets. We can ban the wildlife trade and control the farms when it comes to biosecurity. So this in this sylvatic phase, actually, we are inducing a very high anthropogenic pressures, which includes deforestation and other land use changes, illegal and poorly regulated wildlife trade. Come to think of it, the pangolins are bad to actually illegally traded from South Asia and Southeast Asian nations into China for their consumption. The next is intensified agriculture and livestock production, where pathogens develop antimicrobial resistance on different insecticide, pesticides, and other antimicrobial agents against pathogen. And of course, we cannot exclude out the effect of climate change on development of the disease. And these anthropogenic pressures are intercorrelated to each other. For example, in this one, the land development and the ecological perturbation can directly contribute to environmental availability of the disease, or indirectly contribute to environmental availability of the disease via the vertebrate reservoir host or the parasite intermediate host. And this, if the environment is available for the pathogen to thrive, then it will force the infection to the susceptible human population, thereby creating the disease epidemics and the pandemics. When you look that in a simpler terms, then it can be divided into basic Venn diagram. If there's suboptimal environmental conditions, there is susceptible host, there is pathogen, then the area here, the golden area here is the area for the disease, and the occurrence of epidemics and pandemics starts there. So in the past few years, humans have pushed anthropogenic pressures and increased the human health risk by increasing breeding sites for disease vectors, as irrigations, channels, and dams for mosquitoes proliferate in the case of malaria and dengue. Increased spread of host species by international illegal wildlife trade. For example, our pangolins and bats, where SARS-CoV-2 might be coming from, and then they keep domestic animals and agricultural animals close contact with each other. Thereby, the transfer of pathogen between different species increases. And of course, because of deforestation and illegal logging, there is a loss of predatory species in our ecosystem. Therefore, there is no predatory species for vector animals. And lastly, we're actually increasing the environmental contamination by infectious disease agents. So the bad thing about number 6 is because pathogens becomes resistant to different antimicrobial, antiviral, or other chemicals treated into them. So that is very alarming. So what is the impact of this zoonosis? Let me share this one. Pandemics can cause significant and widespread increases in morbidity and mortality, and have the proportionately higher mortality impacts as seen nowadays. So we have seen higher mortality and morbidity across the globe caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, pandemics can cause economic damage through multiple channels, including short-term fiscal shocks and longer-term negative shocks to economic growth. So For example, in the Philippines, we have billions of deaths because of this COVID-19 pandemic, and that is actually a negative effect on our economic growth. Lastly, there is thirdly, there is behavioral changes among individuals because we have fear-induced aversion to workplaces and other public gatherings places. That's why we're conducting this webinar, because we are afraid of public gathering, and that is actually a primary cause of negative shocks to economic growth during pandemics, because we're afraid of workplaces, we're afraid of public gathering. So there's a negative effect on the growth, economic growth. And lastly, very evident in developing countries right nowadays, where there are countries with weak institutions and legacies of political instability. Pandemics can increase political stresses and tensions. In this context, outbreak response measures such as quarantines have sparked violence and tension between states and the citizens. I'm very sad about this because this is very evident in developing countries where uh, the citizens and the states have an argument on the on their outbreak response. On the other hand, there is also a positive impact of the COVID-19 and this zoonosis. However, I'm not romanticizing this one because the adverse impact, I must say, is very hard to take into. So as you can see here in the figure, on January 31, on the start of the lockdown, there is actually higher nitrogen dioxide in the atmosphere, while after or during the lockdown, there is a reduction of nitrogen dioxide in the atmosphere. So there is a positive impact on the air pollution. The same is to this. So what can we do about this? What can we do about this zoonosis or COVID-19 or other zoonotic diseases or emerging zoonotic diseases? What can we do about it? Can we maintain our drastic measures? In the past few years, we have eliminated vectors. We have applied insecticides, DDT, and other drastic measures in order to prevent zoonosis. But can we maintain this, or can we do the same at this moment? I must say that there is many negative impacts of these drastic measures, including the resistance acquired by insects and other vectors, such as ticks, to insecticides and other chemical substances, unexpected changes in ecology of host populations. There is also impact on non-target species. There is also a negative and often unexpected consequences on ecosystems, as in the use of DDT against malaria. DDT is actually a persistent organic pollutant, which nowadays continue to bioaccumulate and biomagnify in the food chain or the food web. And lastly, there's also a socioeconomic impact, as in the mass killing of poultry to curb avian influenza. So definitely, this is not the most efficient solution to zoonotic diseases and other emerging zoonotic diseases. So what we can do is actually to gather people who protect human, animal, and environmental health and other partners to coordinate, communicate, and collaborate to achieve the best health outcomes for people, animals, and our environment. This is actually a program of One Health. And what I love this program is because we think of the society and the environment and the animals as a whole, not thinking of society itself, but we are actually creating a world where environment and human can live together and prosper together. And that is what I like about this One Health. And this actually, this one, I think, is the best possible way towards sustainable development and towards combating this zoonotic and other emerging diseases. So that's it. Our answer to what to do is as we tackle the alarming impacts of coronavirus crisis, we also need to keep in mind that ongoing nature and climate crisis that threaten our future. It is now more imperative than ever for governments to sign on a new deal for nature and people and globally binding agreement to halve our footprints on nature, stop the loss of unnatural habitats, stop the extinction of living species. And that is our answer. So the truth is, a healthy planet is the foundation of our health and well-being, and there's no room for fictions. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Limbago. Yes, I truly relate to the things you stated in your presentation. So yes, next up we have Ms. Bidi Adhikari. I would like to request her for her presentation. Ms. Bidi, if you would please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Akanksha. Thank you, YFeed, for having me in this webinar. Since everybody is affected and locked up inside their houses, this is a good time to think about this issue and consider this pandemic as an alarm for everyone, especially the youth force, to wake up and question and rebel. The problem generally is that we have disconnected ourselves from the reality of nature. We like to think us being apart from it and not as a part of it. Experts believe that the coronavirus pandemic and climate change are related, and while the definitive origin of COVID-19 is unknown, we know that it is a novel disease that was transferred from animals. So zoonotic diseases are those that can jump from animals to humans, and scientific evidence suggests that this coronavirus jumped from bats to pangolins and then to humans. Pangolins are most illegally traded in the world, and it only takes one animal to come in contact with one person that brings the economy of the world to a halt, upon which 7 billion people depend. As per WWF International, in just 25 years, we have lost over 1 million square kilometers of forest, and we are still clearing over 10 billion trees a year. Forests cover about 30% of the planet and are home to 80% of life on Earth. And ecosystems they create play an essential role in supporting life on Earth. Forestry and agriculture are responsible for 24% of greenhouse gas emissions, forestry being a significant contributor to climate change. Forests provide habitat for 80% of plants and animals that live on land. 4 to 6,000 rainforest species go extinct each year, and farmers chop down trees in order to plant crops or to make room to raise livestock for beef. Out of all the human diseases that have occurred till date, 60% of those are considered to be zoonotic diseases, and it is because of our exposure to of human exposure to wild animals, because of more deforestation increasing per year. Deforestation is the leading cause for the risk of diseases that is increasing every year. As ecologists suggest, species who have managed to not go extinct act as hosts for potentially dangerous pathogens. According to an article in Nature journal, the analysis of around 6,800 ecological communities and on 6 continents adds to a growing body of evidence that connects trends in human development and biodiversity loss to disease outbreaks. So the thing is, everything is happening, but what we have to understand is who is the bearer of all these consequences. So I was talking to one of my friends in Sri Lanka. She is just a teenager. And on the course, we were talking about one of the forests being cut down for the name of in the name of development, and there is a term called eco-anxiety that has been widely found in youth like us today. And we were talking about it. And she had to say that although it is not our fault about deforestation, what is happening in this world about deforestation, climate crisis, and fuel consumption and everything, we must do our bits in everything. And without ruining our mental health, because if something is to happen to us, as if like if we were to not be able to contribute in this movement, there is no one going to do our part. So I think the most important thing that we have to do today is to not dismiss science anymore. We are expanding our cities and we should be aware of it. We are erasing our forests and reshaping the land for agriculture, deforestation, biodiversity loss, emerging pandemics, climate change, climate crashes should not be neglected. It should be our area of concern for every youth. And I know that youth have a major role to play on dealing with surging risk of zoonotic diseases. So I would like to suggest some few things that we could do on this matter. First of all, I think to talk about these issues, we should be well aware of it. We should be well aware of what's happening around us, what are we consuming, how much are we consuming, and what is the system around us. So we should be educating ourselves about everything that happens around us, and educating our colleagues, our friends, our relatives, families, everyone that we see, and we should be doing our bit by that. Also, we should be willing to take responsibility for the future and take action. That is to say that against deforestation, illegal trading of wild animals, and biodiversity loss, we should be speaking out about it. We should promote climate activism. Every kind of activism that involves saving biodiversity, saving saving forests, and saving the life for the future. The will to take control over society and the future, and to take control over climate crisis and to curb it, that should be there within the youth. Another is we should be willing to take leadership of these issues that is going on in today's world, because the future. Because it is our future, we cannot run away from it. We have to we have to live it in the future. We have to preserve it for the next generation and other generations to come. So in one of the programs that I had attended, it had a beginning like our teacher had asked us how much are we willing to live, how much are we willing to live, how many years are we willing to live, and most people answered in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and nobody wanted to live before 30 years. So I think to live, and the situation today is critical, and it needs our attention, and we should be availing ourselves with it. And as it is our future, and we are going to live for another 30 years and 40 years, 50 years, the environment should be livable. So I think it should be our matter of concern. And another thing that we have to do is preserve what we have now, and that remains in the wild, and lean on to more sustainable ways of living and question everything. For example, there is there are still forests remaining in this world that we could preserve. There is a project in Nepal as well that is being there's a forest that is being that has been planned to cut down for development for airport. You might have heard of it, Anisgad Airport. So what we can do there is we might not have the sources to reach out to the government, but we can raise our voices and make the government make ourselves heard. And there is already that forest that has to be saved, and we have to speak about it, since rather than regretting what has already been lost. And we should be more leaning towards sustainable ways of living, and question everything, as in whatever we eat, whatever dairy products that we consume, we should know how it has been produced, how we should localize everything. We should rather than consuming things that were produced far away from our land, we could concentrate on local products. And there is also about thinking globally and acting accordingly to that, and consuming less meat, or consider following a plant-based diet, and give the industries less reasons to clear new forests. And also we could support indigenous groups against outside pressures, and also youth could focus more on how to not fall behind, how to not follow the trends, and follow the trends that are harming the climate, harming the exploiting the land, exploiting the forest, but rather focus on what eco-friendly industries are out there that we could support. And we could educate ourselves on reforestation and deforestation laws that could help us on how to that could help us to track all the illegal work that has been that many industries have been doing. And we should also have I think youth should also be more vocal about holding the governments accountable, holding the corporate houses, companies that are harming our environment, that are promoting deforestation and exploiting livestock. We should be these sectors should be held accountable. And human encroachment in animal habitats have given rise to zoonotic diseases, and due to which wildlife trade and illegal trading of woods and these all global trade should be the point of focus for youth generally. And these global trade, this illegal trading, are unethical and cruel, and also a risk to human health. And our generation should be more aware of all these things before it's too late. So yeah, that is all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Biti, and that was indeed a really insightful presentation. So next up, I would like to call Ms. Archana Soreng for the presentation. Ms. Archana, if you could please. I think Miss Archana is having some technical issues, so I would like to call Miss Jacqueline Lipi Sakia for her presentation.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Okay, so am I audible and is my screen be visible to everyone? Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to and inviting me to the most important webinar at this time. And we are under the shadow of the COVID-19. Still, lot many activities have been opened up. Still, we need to take precautions and we need to follow the rules, the hand washing, wearing of masks every time, still being under the shadow of COVID-19. So with this, I want to begin my presentation and I would be focusing on the role of ecosystem in mitigating and management of COVID-19 and the other diseases. So let me begin with the question, why is this pandemics and other diseases have become very common these days? So mostly I'll be focusing with the three questions. So first question would be from my side is why this is happening. So the tropical deforestation has been carried out since many years now in the terms of economic gains. I like to put the example of Malaysia and other Asian countries which have been destroying the tropical forest. Human encroachment to the forest for setting up industries and setting up of new settlements and for development. But we forget in terms what should be the balance between the development and the destruction of the ecosystem and the forest. So what happens when we destroy the forest, we come in direct contact with the pathogens and with the other diseases which were prevalent in the deforesters, and it becomes unmanageable for us because we are not aware of those pathogens prevalent and we become in direct contact with them. With today's time, there were more illegal poaching happening. I belong to some and I want to give the example of the poachers that is happening for the one-horned rhino. Even though there are laws, there are strict security officials, but still that has continuously been happening. The illegal mining and lobbying of the people around to extract the natural resources in terms of economic gains. So with this points of saying why this is happening, let's move to what happens when the factors under the term why takes place. So there are loss of ecosystem services, the services that has been provided to us by the forest, the livelihood that has been provided to the indigenous people and to us, the wetlands which help us to protect our environment, which also provides livelihood to the people and also provides an ecosystem for the animals. The forest and habitat fragmentation. So the forest and the habitat of our animals has been fragmented because we have been continuously destroying it. Biodiversity loss. So we have a cycle of a balance in the nature, which is created by nature and nourished by nature. But when too much of anthropogenic force are applied to it, it tends to lose it. The factors of destroying the forest and giving limited access to the forest product, giving away the forest products and the land to the industries, put a major pressure on the indigenous people and make them more vulnerable. It makes them lose their livelihood, their food supply, and they are in the worst of their collapse when they lose their forest land and their activity in the forest. So, looking at the why and what, I would like to focus on how we can prevent it and work towards a more sustainable future for us. It has been rightly said by one of our speakers, we need to advocate of what future we want to see for us and for the coming generation. We, the youth, has the strength to work towards it and make and bring the change for us. So in this, I want to propose for the One Health approach to control the zoonosis. So One Health approach is combining environment, animal health, and human health together and making it as one approach and protecting all the three elements under one umbrella. We need to control and prevent the diseases through an interdisciplinary response across human, animal, and environment health. It has to be an integrated approach to safeguard and protect three of the important parts of the environment, this human, animal, and the environmental health. We also need finance and we need to manage it. And also we need the will of the policymakers and from the community itself to manage this crisis. The zoonosis and the pandemics, which we already seen during the COVID-19 period, are very complex. So if one system collapses, it usually collapses the other following systems. So we need to prevent it and take the responsibility and bring together several sectors, environment, agriculture, health, trade, and commerce to prevent the zoonosis. So we also need very strong policy framework and judicious legal mechanism to accompany the policy framework. And the most important is we need to implement it on the ground. Continuous monitoring and evaluation is required to control the zoonosis in the future. So success will require addressing the root causes of the zoonosis and the diseases, which we have seen in the COVID-19 pandemic. But unfortunately, we are still not clear of the root cause and the root things from where it has come from. So addressing the root cause is very important. And then lastly, I want to focus on us, that is, we are the change makers. We need to change our behaviors and our action in relation to the ecosystem. We need to be aware of, we need to know where we need to integrate the environment protection and development. We need to take care of our health as well as of our environmental health. With this, I would like to show you all a video explaining the One Health system and how we can help in the controlling the Zoonosis and the future pandemics.
So, hello.
One Health is an interdisciplinary perspective that recognizes the interconnectivity of all life systems on planet Earth. The footprint of all living things overlap like a Venn diagram. The health of humans, animals, and the environment are inextricably linked, and stressing one life system impacts them all. So, what efforts can be made to promote global health and well-being? To diminish the domino effect of negative impact, it is pivotal that we manage issues and minimize unintended consequences before they spiral out of control. For example, warmer temperatures worldwide have caused an increase in mosquito populations, which thrive in hot climates. Rather than a 30 to 40-day gestation period, mosquitoes become full-grown in just 6 days, leading to rapid population growth. And warmth causes a greater rate of transmitting infections during their lifetime. The spread of infectious disease is one of the primary focuses of One Health. 75% of emerging diseases in humans can be traced back to wild animals. The Ebola virus in bats, for example, is considerably distanced from most human life. But in a scenario where an infected bat contaminates fruits, which are consumed by monkeys, that are later hunted by humans, we can easily have an outbreak on our hands. Preemptively treating wild animals would remove the risk to domestic animals and humans alike. Shifting the paradigm upstream helps control and prevent disease transmission and demonstrates the need for a unified One Health approach. It's important that all disciplines and spheres become aware of their impact on other life systems on Earth. By enhancing cooperation between health and environmental professionals, communicating issues and goals with political leaders, and educating the public sector, we can achieve the best health outcomes for all of Earth's living creatures. Let's join efforts to act responsibly and positively impact global health. Start today with One Health.
So with this, I would like to conclude my today's talk. Thank you very much for listening, and I would be happy to respond to if there are any questions. Thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to speak in this platform. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Saikia. So we have a question here from Broderick Sagbo, which we will be addressing in the question and answer round later on. So next up, we have Ms. Archana Soreng. I think she is here with us, and I would just like to hand this session over to her. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Akansha, for this lovely introduction. And Johar, everyone. And I'm very happy to be here and interacting with you all here on biodiversity conservation and conservation of forest. Uh, First of all, what I strongly would like to emphasize is, as we all are talking about zoonotic diseases and biodiversity conservation and conservation of forest, I would like to emphasize on the primary role of the indigenous and the local communities in terms of biodiversity conservation and conservation of the forest. Uh, when we are talking about forest, the other communities see forest as a commercial commodities, wherein how they can earn money out of it. But for us, indigenous people and local communities, land, forest, and nature is a source of identity. So when I say it's a source of identity, like for example, my name is Archana Soreng. The surname, that is Soreng, I belong to Khadiya tribe. In a Khadiya language, the term Soreng means rock. Similarly, there are other tribal surnames, like, for example, Kullu, which means tortoise in my language. There is Kiro, which means tiger. There is Kerketa, which means bird. So, we indigenous communities and local communities are intertwined with nature so deeply that even the element of nature is there in our surname. And that is why when I say that nature, forest is a source of life and identity, it is also embedded in our name as well. Talking about biodiversity conservation, over the years, indigenous people and local communities have been protecting uh, the biodiversity and forest through their traditional knowledge and practices. And not only through the traditional knowledge and practices, but they have also been vigilant, and they have also been protecting the biodiversity and forest by resisting the extractive developmental projects which have made an attempt to destroy the forest. Like, I come from an area which is highly a mining area, and the impacts which I have seen is that many a times there has been instances like, there is no air pollution in the rural areas. Air pollution is one of an issue or one of the problem which is majorly prevalent in the urban areas. But one thing which I would like to highlight through my personal experience and also through my field research is that in the rural areas, or in the areas of the indigenous people and local communities, one of the major sources of air pollution is because of the extractive developmental projects. First, in order to set up this extractive developmental projects, the entire area, uh, trees and biodiversity is destroyed and cut down. And also the extractive developmental process itself emits so much of carbon and also other kinds of air pollution, which not only has impacts on the tribal communities in terms of their livelihood, as it deprives them from the minor forest produce and forest based livelihood, but also it deprives them from their source of having right to good health. And when I talk about right to good health, I would like to also emphasize that over the years, uh, in our area, a lot of people are facing having diseases like cancer, lung cancer, and at the same time they are also having issues pertaining to breathing challenges. But whenever we are talking about health issues and impacts of air pollution or extractive developmental projects, no one is connecting these dots. Rather, they are looking health aspect and the air pollution and the climate crisis in a very individual ways, or in a very compartment ways. And that is why I feel it is very important to bring uh, this conversation and have a dialogue that how health has serious connection along with air pollution and also environmental crisis there. Because the cancer, lung cancer, which the community members there are facing in my area, is deeply connected because of the number of extractive developmental projects increasing. And this extractive developmental project is happening at the cost of the environment and biodiversity, and for which the indigenous people have been fighting, and for which there has been laws, but there has been no implementation of the laws. So if I see it in a vicious circle, I also feel that it is in order to prevent diseases or zoonotic diseases, it is, I would like to connect it with the recognition of land rights of the indigenous people, like recognition of the recognition of the rights of the indigenous people over the land, forest, and territories. Because if the rights of the indigenous peoples over the land, forest, and territories are not recognized, they are under the threat of displacement, mining, and migration. And because of displacement, migration, and mining, there is loss of culture tradition, which is also preventing the community members to ensure a good transition of this traditional knowledge and practices. Along with that, because of migration, because of displacement, there are also major health issues because of the change of the areas and the habitat of the community members. And because of health issues and the livelihood issues which the indigenous peoples are facing because of non recognition, it is also creating an hurdles in terms of achieving the climate action, in terms of achieving the sustainable development goals. At the same time, because of the loss of culture and traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge of the indigenous practices also is leading and creating an obstacle for them to continue to practice their indigenous way of biodiversity conservation through the traditional knowledge and practices and community-led forest protection practices. And that is why I feel that until and unless the indigenous people are secure, their rights are recognized over the land and forest, they will not be able to have a sustained way of living. And for that matter, when we are talking about zoonotic diseases and biodiversity conservation, I would also highlight another perspective is that when we are talking about sustainable development, when we are talking about developmental paradigm, it is also very important to highlight that I feel that until and unless the development has sustainable benefits for the indigenous communities, there should not be any development in the land of indigenous peoples. Because what are the indigenous people getting on behalf of land? They are getting compensation, which is very rarely they are getting any compensation. Because in my area where I come from, it's almost been 40 to 30 years, but still now people have not received compensation of the dams construction and the infrastructure construction. Apart from that, when the extractive developmental projects are also built, which is at the cost of the biodiversity, the indigenous people communities members are given low level of jobs. When I say low level of jobs, is that outsider peoples are brought in, wherein they are given the higher position of the jobs and the indigenous people are given the lower levels of jobs, which also has huge impact on the health crisis. At the same time, when I talk, they have, it has huge impact on the health crisis. They're also not given proper wages, and they're also made to work for overtime. This itself also has a huge impact on the on their health. So what connection I want to highlight is that the entire money which has been given in terms of land and the jobs which are given in terms of the land is not sustainable, because money and jobs will be over at some point of time. But what is important is land for the indigenous people, and only when they have land with them, they will be able to continue their forest based livelihood. They'll be continue to practice their own sustainable way of livelihood, which will help them to continue their forest protection, which will help them to continue to biodiversity rejuvenation in their area, which itself will prevent this zoonotic diseases in their area. And also, one of the quote which I remember from my grandfather, who has been pioneer of forest protection in our village, is that he used to say that for us, prime job is to maintain a sustainable relationship with the forest. Only when the forest is in a sustained way, we will be able to live in a sustained way. And that is what I feel is today is very important, because during our ancestors used to have a harmonious relationship with nature, animals, and entire biodiversity. But why today there is no harmony and in the biodiversity and nature? It's all because of the greed, it's all because of the extractive developmental uh, activities which is happening. And that is why I think it is very important today when we are discussing that we need to revive, we need to restore, and we need to empower the knowledge system of the indigenous people of the forest protection and biodiversity conservation, and also respect the worldviews of the indigenous people. So this is what I would like to say. At the end, I also strongly feel that indigenous people should be leaders of biodiversity conservation, not victims of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So yes, that was Miss Archana, and yes, she really gave an insightful presentation. So moving on, the next and the last guest for today is Miss Cindy Kobe. Miss Cindy Kobe is unfortunately not with us here today for this session, but she has a video, and I would just like to play the video for you all. And I would like my technical team to please play the video.
Tropical forests have been destroyed at extremely alarming rates. And in 2020 alone, there's been fires in California, fires in Australia, fires in Congo forest, and fires in the Amazon, which is the largest tropical forest in the world. Tropical forests are home to a lot of species, a lot of animals, a lot of communities as well, indigenous communities involved. And the Ogiek community, the community that where I'm from, is an example of communities that live in the forest. And COVID-19 has laid bare that there is a broken relationship with nature. We have lost our connection with nature. We are no longer living the olden ways. We are now in the western side where we cut trees, we destroy, we kill animals, and we destroy our biodiversity, which is of great benefit to us. An example of viruses that have emerged as a result of biodiversity loss and the cutting down of trees are SARS, we have the Ebola virus, and many other viruses, and they all emerged as a result of biodiversity. Biodiversity is everything: it's animals, it's plants, it's trees, it's everything. And an example of what happened in the Ogiek community in the 10 years, 20 years ago, a long time ago, I don't know the exact time, is that Ogiek community are hunter and gatherers. They hunt for food, and one day hunters, they went deep inside the forest and they killed animals that are not supposed to be killed. This later led to death, and the community was almost extinct because they ate meat that was not supposed to be eaten. And this is what is happening in the world right now because of wildlife trade. And the wildlife are some of the causes of the breakage of this bond. And an example is wildlife trade. We're now trading wildlife. We're not protecting them like we used to in the olden age. And also human encroachment. This is due to the building of roads, the building of hospitals in places in forested areas, and also deforestation. These are some of the biggest causes of the breakage of this bond. And what do we need to do to reconnect this bond with nature? We need to go back to the olden days. We need to live traditionally, but in a proper traditional way. And we also need to stop deforestation and plant more trees. When we plant more trees, we create a home for this wildlife that we're trading. And we also create a home for the animals and the species. We also need to conserve biodiversity. We need to protect them. We need to ensure that there's no biodiversity loss. And we also need to ensure that in the future, our children, our children's children will not be able to look at biodiversity and just look at it from the museum side of it, but to also witness it for themselves. They also need to be a regulation of wildlife trade. And I don't think there should be any wildlife trade whatsoever, because when we trade bats, we trade ostriches, we trade crabs, all animals, it's a harm. We're harming the planet. We're harming Mother Nature. And COVID-19 pandemic and the future pandemics, which we hope won't be there, are all closely tied to tropical forest deforestation. We don't need to cut trees because trees are everything. Trees are life. They bring water. They bring food. They absorb carbon dioxide and all that. The pandemic is a warning sign that we need to go back. We need to protect our planet. We need to ensure that we are preventing the coronaviruses and other emerging zoonotic diseases. And thank you so much, YD, for having me. And away we all. Thank you.
So yes, that was Miss Cindy Kobe, and I would also like to thank her as she prepared a short presentation and she expressed herself very well. So yes, that was the end for our panel discussion. So moving on, we have a question and answer round where I would like to request all of our participants to turn-wise unmute themselves and you can ask your queries. And I would also like to request our panelists to please take up the lead and address our participants' queries accordingly. So yes.
So can give opportunity for me. Hello,
Yes, you're audible.
hello, Sister
Yes,
Zoonotic. Hello.
yes, you're audible.
Uh, hello. Hello.
Hello, yes, you're audible.
Okay. Thank you. For moderator. Okay. Sorry. Uh, wait. Uh, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Uh, okay. Now, I will talk about biodiversity. Yes. Now, I now I feel like to introduce our country. Right now, we have a problem because people they don't take care of the biodiversity. The uh, okay, wait. I think it's a problem. Wait. It's still a problem. Sorry. I context.
Yes, Octavio, I think you are having issues with your internet. You can drop your queries on the chat box itself. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. My internet is file fault. Uh, wait. Wait. Can give.
Okay, so I guess Octavio had a bit of issue with his internet. So is there anyone who would like to?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Yes, I am Muisa Musongora from Democratic Republic of Congo, and I have been living in a forest area whereby, uh, okay, uh, traditional community or local communities are living on forest exploitation, some products, and for long they have been living in harmony with the forest without destroying it, since they were just exploiting the forest for their livelihood until they started exploiting the forest for commercial purposes. And then I just wonder, uh, okay, combining the conclusion of the previous presentation, whereby the orator was saying that it would be better for communities not to exploit the forest, and yet it's the main source of their livelihood. So how these communities, how these communities can okay, mitigate or can just adapt to this move for biodiversity conservation, while also while also making sure that their livelihood is not jeopardized. That's my question.
So can I mention the question? Hello, moderator.
Yes, yes, you're audible. Go ahead.
I want to answer the question of the latest question of our participant from Congo. He asked on what are the what can we do on the on indigenous people exploiting our forests. Actually, they can still use the forest for their livelihood. What we need is to lessen the impact of the commercialization of our forests. For example, we can you can voice out your needs to the your national government to provide indigenous people the alternative livelihood, not to exploit the forest into a maximum level, but on a threshold level. So we can still use the forest for our livelihood purposes, but not exploit them. We need a forest to replenish itself. So there's a zonation of forests. For example, this part is for livelihood, and this part is for conservation. And that's what is One Health is. We're actually providing humans in the other part of ecosystem to thrive into one ecosystem. So that is the essence of the One Health. We want to thrive together and not separated to each other. We don't want the forest to be not exploited, but we want to conserve it. So that's the point. And then on the alternative livelihood, I think you can provide you can voice out your queries and your questions to your national government to provide the indigenous people the alternative livelihood, not to exploit the forest. And then the next step is to educate the indigenous people, educate them. Education must be backed up with science and provided with evidences that we need our forests. If we can see they can see the importance of forests not just to themselves but to the whole world, then they can appreciate what we are doing right now. I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Can I still intervene? Can I still intervene?
Yes, yes.
Okay. For me, I find it very difficult for people who have been living for maybe more than many centuries on their forest, and then you come just one day require that people stop exploiting their forest. And international mechanisms that have been implemented in different countries with local communities, we realize that local communities or indigenous communities are just left behind because like red mechanisms. Most of the time, on a local level, local communities don't feel the impact of these projects because yes, on the national government, it can be funded on the it can be funded on the national government level, but local communities they don't receive direct benefit from that, even though they are saying that no, they can build schools, they can build roads, they can build hospitals in those communities, but you realize that these communities don't find their interest met because if they are building maybe hospitals, they will just build one hospital for more than maybe 10,000 people, and these people will not even have access to these medication facilities. Like for instance, due to poverty, they don't have enough resources. Even though these hospitals have been built, but they don't have enough resources to afford these medications. So they feel like, yes, this project has been implemented, even though they are saying that we have to protect the forest, we have to reduce our exploitation, to reduce maybe our impact to the forest. And for that, we'll be compensated by building this hospital. But we realize that the same hospital we are still paying. So I was thinking that maybe some mechanisms where they can maybe raise the standard livings of these local communities to a level that can allow them to survive without exploiting the forest, like job diversification. If they can be able just to diversify their jobs, it can help them. Apart from that, okay, I just talked from experience from Congo, whereby the forest management is based on a law that allows its communities to exploit some portion of the forest while conserving others. Maybe those forests that are just dedicated to conservation are just conserved for their interest in terms of biodiversity richness and so on. But those forests that are exploited, they have just the law. The law has just okay. The law that is set has at least is set in such a way that the communities have to be aware of what trees they can exploit, which one they don't have to exploit. But unfortunately, there is a very low enforcement of this regulation. Regulation exists, but unfortunately not enforced. And this makes it difficult for these communities to be controlled, because even though the law doesn't allow maybe the exploitation of a certain tree species or maybe hunting of a certain animal species, but unfortunately on the ground, there is no enforcement of these regulations. So this makes it maybe difficult for communities to be aware of even these laws, because maybe most of them didn't go to school, they don't read a lot. So if there is law enforcement of these, there is law enforcement of the different laws that exist, it can also be one of the causes of forest destruction or even biodiversity loss. So even though there are some, I usually think that even though there are some international convention on conservation of biodiversity, but it has also to go up to the local level, to the local communities. Local communities have to be involved and make sure that they feel the impact, the direct impact on their livelihood of these different mechanisms or projects that have been implemented in the context of biodiversity conservation. Thank you.
I would like to address to the points here. So what we could do is, each country, each region, each community, each locality has their unique and different problems, and there has to be the location specific solution has to be developed, which we could term it as the macro planning and solutions. So each geography has different ways and different ideas and different policies of addressing things. So coming to the development which has not been reached to the indigenous people. So what could be done is, like, we should have one focal point in the government who, according to the population, could be divided with the ratio of population and with the ratio of person who has been appointed to take care that these policies and that this facilities that has been given by the government reaches to them. And if there's additional needs from the indigenous communities, this has to report back to the government or the municipalities. So this way we can step by step try to address the issues and reach to each and every one of them. And the secondly, to the previous question, it could be that the indigenous community sometimes we can allow them to be in the forest and use the resources available. What I have seen in different states, there are different policies. So in the south of India, that is in Kerala, so the government allows the indigenous community to stay inside the forest and and live with the resources available in the forest. And in turn, they also protect the forest from the encroachers or any illegal cutting down of trees. So it is a one way of approachment, which is win-win situation for both the government and for the indigenous community. So each problem has to be addressed at the macro level. We cannot term it in an umbrella way, in a more broader way. So each government, each locality has to take a call what could be the most best way to address it. And coming to Akansha, can I address the question in the chat box now, or do you want me to wait for the more questions coming in?
Yes, it's fine, Jacqueline. You can address the question.
Okay, thank you. So coming to the question that is put to me by Sabo. So we need to understand there are different kinds of forest, and then we termed it as the most protected forest, and sometimes it calls it as the open forest. But all the animals and the biodiversity, everyone doesn't live on the deforested. So even there forest, there are divisions where each animal picks up a spot which is favorable for them. If you consider suppose animal which suitable, which has a habitat in the deforest and which is adapted to it, but when it's come to the decrease in the density of forest, the animal couldn't survive or couldn't adapt to it. So even though there are dense forests and animals are staying there, we need to understand each animal requires different habitat. Sometimes a deep forest, sometimes a less deep forest, sometimes just a grassland. So we need not only focus on the deep forest and conserve it, we should also, and on the animals living in the deep forest, we should also be aware that there are animals which just live on the grasslands and live on the grassland, or they might be staying just besides the bank of a river. We need to conserve that as well. And even though this minimum forest or the grasslands are destroyed, we are hampering the animals living in those places. This is from my side. Over to you, Akansha.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jacqueline. So yes, any participants who would like to ask any question to our panelists, you can unmute yourself and ask the questions. Or you can also drop it in the chat box.
So, hello?
Yes, you're audible. Yes, Octavio, you're audible. I guess he is still having the problem with his internet connection, but I guess he has dropped his question, so I can read it for you. It says, how can we implement good information to community in rural area for taking care of the agri-florists? So what can we do for them? Any of the panelists can take the lead and address this question. Mr. Jomel S, BT, and Ms. Jacqueline, any one of you can answer the question.
Yes, so let me try to answer the question of Octavio. So firstly, we need to communicate and make the industries and the other people who has been trying to extract the forest resources, the importance and the negativity of exploiting it without taking any measures. That is one. Second is to the community. Well, there are different ideas and diversity in the community's perspective. First is you would see the old people who are very concerned about the indigenous practices, indigenous way of living, and then you would find a few youth who are mostly trying to have a living and not trying to adapt the indigenous practices because they're not finding it sustainable. So in this, the most important thing is we meet the village head, which with this approach I took actually when I was doing my dissertation. So firstly, we meet the village head, make him understand and try to get his perspective, what he thinks of the conservation and protection and taking forward the indigenous practices and the way they have been living, their ancestors has been living. So slowly from that, we need to try to address step by step. If the community is not able to conserve or not willing to conserve, why is it so? Is it so because they are not finding it feasible? Is it so because if we follow that indigenous process, they're not able to have a livelihood? They're not able to meet their needs. They're not able to buy their meal, pay for their children's school. So with that, we need to take a step-by-step process and then we need to make them aware that this are what is good and what is bad. So again, in this also, we need to take a macro approach because world is a very diverse place. Each small place has the unique problems. So that needs to be done. That's from my side. Over to you, Akansha.
Thank you so much. So anyone has any questions, you can still unmute yourself and drop it in the chat box as we will move on in today's session. So now I would like to request our panelists for concluding remarks or their feedback in 2 to 3 minutes, as feedbacks are always appreciated. So yes, I will request each speaker in turn so that they can put forth their concluding remarks for today's session. So firstly, I would like to request Ms. Bidi to conclude her remarks. Ms. Bidi, over to you. I guess Ms. Bidi is having issues with her internet, so I would like to request Mr. Jomel Limbago to please put forth his concluding remarks. Over to you, Jomel.
Okay. Actually, I already delivered my one of my concluding remarks on my slides, but let me repeat on my concluding remarks in this session, because we are tackling COVID-19 and the other emerging infectious diseases. We also need to tackle the alarming impacts of this coronavirus crisis, and to keep in mind the ongoing nature and climate crisis that threaten our nature and our future. It is empirical and imperative that we request our governments to sign a new deal for nature and people, a globally binding agreement to halve our footprint in nature, stop the loss of natural habitats, and the extinction of the species. It is also imperative to conclude that to apply the One Health program, which enables the collaboration, the communication, and the coordination of people who protect human, animal, and environmental health and other partners to achieve the best health outcomes for people, animals, and environment, and plants as a whole. So we want a one ecosystem where where the humans and other organisms on Earth prosper in one viable ecosystem. Also, the truth is, we back into my presentation that a healthy planet is a foundation of our health and well-being, and that is a fact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jomel. So now up next, I would like to request Ms. Jacqueline Lipi-Saikia for her concluding remarks.
Thank you so much. So in the end, I would like to say the conservation of the forest, protecting our Mother Earth, and protecting the biodiversity is not only good for us to prevent the future pandemics and also to address the One Health, but it will also help us to reduce the disaster risks, to reduce the economic loss, the social loss, and also it will not push people, especially in the South Asian countries, more into poverty. It will help us to achieve the sustainable development goals more quicker and in a more sustainable way. And we should continue fighting for it. We should try to frame our future by ourselves. The youth is the strength for it. So in the end, I would like to congratulate this kind of platform where the youth from across the world could come together and form a dialogue, which is very much important with this current shadow under the pandemic, and also with the growing number of disasters, which is having a huge impact on the people. So this platform is very much important, and I look forward for more this kind of platform and more discussions to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And yes, so that was all. And now I would like to request Ms. Sumnima Ghimire for concluding today's webinar with synthesis and call for action. Over to you, Sumnima.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So thank you, Akanksha. A warm greeting to you all. Introducing myself, I am Sumnima Ghimire, currently working as a program intern at YFIT Foundation. First, I would like to thank all the panelists as well as all the participants for their valuable time and presence. It is my immense pleasure to be a part of this beautiful talk. Today's webinar was all about raising awareness among the youth regarding protection of tropical forest and biodiversity for preventing zoonotic diseases. Today's topic was very well covered by our panelists. Our first speaker, Mr. Jomel S. Limbago, discussed about components of viruses, proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2, or COVID-19, suggesting bats or pangolin to be the possible host of this virus. Discussing about the pathways of pandemic and about protection and restoration of nature to combat these diseases, he also highlighted how we cannot blame animals for disease outbreaks, as in most of the cases, it's anthropogenic pressure at the end that leads to such pandemics and all. Ms. Bidi Adhikari was our second speaker. She highlighted on promoting youth activism for maintaining connection with nature, saving biodiversity, as well as an ecosystem as a whole. She mentioned about human acts that has led to biodiversity loss, climate crisis, on sustainability, and so on. With that, her concern about the consequences of these acts to us and also to our future generation was very much appreciable. We had our third speaker, Ms. Jacqueline Lee Pisaikia. She presented on the role of ecosystem in mitigating and management of COVID-19 and other zoonotic diseases. With ever-growing tropical deforestation, human encroachments, we are coming more into contact with wildlife that carries microbes that might be well suited to kill us. She focused on one-hand approach involving interdisciplinary sectors of human, environment, agriculture, trade, and so on. While Ms. Archana Soreng, our fourth speaker, highlighted about the indigenous communities and their connection with nature. Traditional knowledge, practices, and their lifestyles have a greater role in protecting biodiversity. However, she mentioned how extractive development projects at the cost of and biodiversity loss have been a greater challenge for indigenous people living there. Next, we had shared the recorded video by Ms. Cindy Kobai, in which she highlighted about the destructions in tropical forests around the world that has greatly affected biodiversity in it, as well as human or indigenous communities living there. She mentioned how we have lost our connection with nature and how haphazardly we cut down trees, leading to outbreak of Ebola, SARS in the past, and now COVID-19. As expressed by each speaker, it is very important to protect forest resources and biodiversity, as their destructions have always been worse for human. SARS, Ebola, and now COVID-19, all three of these are highly infectious viruses that have caused global panic since 2002. And never to forget, all three of them jumped to human from wild animal that lived in dense tropical forest. UN Science Panel suggests that just in 20 years alone, between 1980 to 2000, 100 million of hectares of forested land were converted in tropics. This kind of encroachment have been creating perfect opportunities for disease-causing pathogens to pass from wild and domestic animal to people. Occurrence of these emerging infectious diseases pose significant risks to human health and also causes outbreak that challenges public health. According to UN report, at present only 23% of the planet is in natural state, and it is very essential to safeguard them. We should time and again realize the fact about how humanity depends on the ecosystem services provided by this intact forest. Now it is a big time to come up, work together, and increase the resilience of ecosystem so that the virus like COVID-19 do not keep joining a list of emerging zoonotic diseases. It is believed that combating zoonotic diseases not only enhances environmental resilience, but will also help achieve United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, as they affect combined interfaces of human, animal, as well as environment. I strongly believe today's webinar to have been able to raise awareness, a sense of responsibility, and realization among us. Youth-oriented programs and webinars like this can be very beneficial and crucial to understand environmental issue at broader perspective. I would like to thank and congratulate the whole WIFI team for successfully organizing the webinar and extend my gratitude once again to all the panelists and participants. Thank you very much. Over to you, Akanksha.
Thank you so much, Somnima, for your concluding remarks and call for action. So if anyone has any questions, you can just unmute yourself and give your remarks on this. Else, I would like to move on. So yes, that was all for today. And I would like to thank everyone who are with us and who stayed till the end of the program. I Hope this webinar was helpful and all of us got the opportunity to learn something different, yet something very informative. Before closing, I would like to sincerely thank all of our 5 guest speakers who attended our webinar and the audience for patiently attending the webinar till this very end. I would also like to thank our supporting partners, that is Life in Land, Pawanka Fund, and Asia Young Indigenous Network for constantly supporting us. YFeed Foundation is truly very overwhelmed by all of your presence, and it was truly a great pleasure to have you all here. And yes, it was an amazing event, and we would all love to see you really soon in more of such events hosted by YFeed. Please do stick with us with all of the updates, and you can also join us on our Facebook page and also check out our recent webinars by YFeed Foundation on YFeed Foundation's YouTube channel. So by this, I would like to conclude today's session and I would like to wrap up. Thank you everyone once again. Thank you so much for being with us till the very end. And yes, that's it. So yes, thank you all and have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you so
Also,
much.
thank you.